all here on a Monday night near the end of February. My name is Emily Mooney, and I'm the one who's been sending all the emails, the invitations for this event. I am OCASI's project coordinator for this project. We have 4 partner organizations involved in the project as well. We are working with Access Alliance Multicultural Health Center, which is going to be providing a couple of the workshops near the end of the project. We are also working with Social Planning Toronto, which is conducting the evaluation for us. And St. Stephen's Community House is providing several more of the workshops. And Onboard Canada is providing slots for online governance training, which I do encourage you all to sign up for and participate in. I'd also like to welcome those who are joining us by webinar. This will be recorded as a webinar, and if you'd like to listen to it again after the workshop is over, we'll get you set up with a way to listen to it. We are also very pleased to welcome Bill Sparks here from Management Advisory Services, which will be conducting several of the workshops. But for now, I'd like to turn you over to our very able and welcome facilitator, Sonia Narad. I'm very happy to have her here. Welcome, Sonia, and thanks for coming.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, good evening, everybody. How are you all? Everybody's good? Brave the winds to get here. We have about 2 hours together, and in terms of our agenda for today, are you advancing or am I advancing? What should we do here?
We'll both advance. And we will be here.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of our agenda for today, I'm going to quickly just go through our objectives so that we are all on the same page as to what I understand our purpose is. Spend a little bit of time getting to know each other and do a bit of an introduction that'll also warm us up for our 2 hours. And then we get into the content, and governance is complex. There's a lot to talk about in this workshop. I break it down into what I hope will be clear sections and topics that will enable you to better understand some of the key principles. But it is complex, and that's why there's a number of other workshops that are following this one that will go into much more detail around some of the pieces. But in any case, we'll talk about what governance is. We'll talk about a little bit around corporate governance, fiduciary responsibility of board members, and board accountability. I'll spend much more time on functions and conditions for good governance and the governance models, and we'll wrap it up close to 8:30. Okay. So before we get into it, I did want to talk a little bit more, though, around our objectives. It really is an opportunity for us together to have some conversations. I'll be talking a lot, but I really hope to hear from a number of you as well, and discuss what the principles of good governance are, what the foundation for that is, getting into the nitty-gritty, what the roles and functions of boards are, and then duties and responsibilities of the board and of individual board members. Okay? That's what everybody understands they've come for tonight, yes? Wonderful. Okay, so let's get going with introductions. And my style, my approach is pretty flexible. I want to make sure that people are understanding the content, and that you can ask questions as we go along and not get stuck because you're thinking about something, right? And meanwhile, the content continues. So please ask questions. Let's clear things up. Move on. I can do that too if that's easier. It's over here, right? Sorry, guys. No. My introductions. Why isn't it showing up? I'll introduce myself. Sorry, the slide is blank. So, as I mentioned, my name is Sonia Narad. I run a company called SN Management, and have been doing that since 2011. Work with lots and lots and lots of not-for-profit organizations across all sectors, health, social services, and within that, homelessness, women's organizations, mental health organizations, housing organizations, employment organizations. Everybody's different, and at the same time, we all have some pretty common experiences and relationships. I did work for 15 to 20 years in the sector. I know some of you around the table from my previous life, working in the community, and some of you through my consulting work. My approach is to consulting really is grounded in my personal life and also my professional life working in community health, and a dear commitment to issues of equity and access, and a belief that the not-for-profit sector is incredibly efficient and effective in meeting community needs, and boards are a big part of that, right? As the people and as the entity that provides leadership to the sector. So always excited to work with boards. In my consulting work, I do a lot of strategic planning, and that's much of the engagement I have with boards of directors. But then also operational planning and evaluations and needs assessments, and increasingly big system coordination and development. I think everybody knows the world is going through a lot of change, particularly now we have a change in government. And it's requiring and going to require organizations, I think, to work quite a bit differently, and so hopefully this workshop can also support you as the board to reflect on that. Let's get into hearing who's in the room, if that's okay. So I have some questions for you, which I hope will come up. I don't think they will. There's something a bit funny with the presentation. Okay, so that's fine. Let's do a go around. What's your name? What organization are you representing? First, what's the organization you're representing, and in what capacity? Are you a board member? Are you in a different role within the organization? And then, I'll jot some notes. What's your burning question? Why are you here tonight? Or why did somebody send you here tonight? What do you really want as your takeaway for the evening? Okay, do you want to start?
Yes, my name is Melisai Mackenzie. I'm from Lao Association of Ontario, and I'm Executive Director there. The city sent me here. I have done a course like this in the past, I think 2 years ago, through OCASI as well, but it's different instructors, so I'm looking forward to learning more things and new things.
Okay. Okay. Anything in particular, or just in general?
Just again refreshing on the governance and the board duties and responsibility and all these different again topics, just to refresh again, and then I can bring it back to the board. If I would you be giving us some material? This material?
I can actually, while you're talking, I'm gonna disseminate.
Okay,
this,
so this way I don't have to make notes.
No. Well, you can, of course. Go ahead.
My name is Kumar. I am with the Senior Tamil Center of Ontario, with about 1,500 seniors as members. We try to keep them busy. Essentially, that is the fundamental thing. And of course, we do help them with, say, certain age-related problems. And I am there as the president of the organization. Though I had carried on with so many various parts of the planet in various capacities, but I never underwent a course on governance. Okay. So I'm very curious to know how I managed all this without proper knowledge. Thank you very much.
All right, great. So my name is Vasanthi, and I'm from the Senior Tamil Center in Ontario. I'm the CEO of the organization. So he is on the board side, and I'm on the administrative side.
Great.
So I have attended a few classes, but still I want to learn more about the governance side, and that's why I'm here.
Great. Okay.
I'm Isi Blanco from Springtide Resources. I'm new to the board. Springtide Resources has been around for 4 years and is working really hard within the education to end gender-based violence. I'm a treasurer to the board, banker by trade, so I would like to learn pretty much everything. Never been to a workshop or to anything similar.
Wonderful. Okay, good. Good to have a board member, 2 board members now. Hi.
Hi, my name is Kelly Montgomery. The interim executive director at the Sign 55 Plus Senior Center. We're a seniors active living center in Western Toronto. New to the position, I've worked there for 5 years in various capacities. And my most pressing goal for being here is to be able to learn as much as I can to go take back to my organization, because we're definitely going through a transition period right now. So we need to make some changes on our board. So I think this will be very useful.
Okay, so pretty general interest so far in governance as a concept, as the roles and responsibilities, and how the board relates to the organization so far. Okay, hi.
Hi, I'm Sheila Durno. I am on the board at Silent Voice Canada. I've been on the board for 3 or 4 years now, and I just recently became chair of the board. And this is my first governance training, official governance training, so I'm more on the general side as well. I don't have any pressing questions yet, but I'm sure I will.
Okay. And as we're chatting, if anybody does have something, let us know. We'll write it down and then we'll see if we can get to it.
Okay. Saima Awan. I am a brand new board member for the Working Women Community Center. Just been a member for a month, so I'm really looking forward to everything that are covered in the objectives, because I'm a blank slate.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
I'm Kelly McKenzie. I'm the executive director of Silent Voice, so Sheila is my board chair, the board chair. And I think I'm interested in the board ED intersection. And also we will be doing some policy reviews and some procedure reviews, and so I'm interested in what board policies and procedures need to exist.
Great.
For good governance.
Okay.
Hi. Yes, hi. My name is Harmy Mendoza, and I am the executive director at the Women Abuse Council of Toronto. So we do a lot of policy analysis, research, community participatory research. We focus on issues related to women abuse, or gender-based violence now. We're actually undergoing our strategic planning session, lots of changes for the organization. And my goal is to bring this information back to my board. Unfortunately, I don't have a member here today, but I am sure that I will be able to engage a few of them for the upcoming session. So,
Hi.
Hi everyone, I'm Ying Wang. Like my colleague Saima, I'm a new board member at Working Women's Community Center, a women's settlement and immigration agency. And in my day job, I'm a public servant, so we focus more on the compliance side. So I'm interested to switch and look at the governance side today in the workshop.
Wonderful. Hi.
My name is Abby. I'm the administrative assistant at CANTI, so Canadian Tamil Youth Development Center. It's a youth-based organization where it was originally founded back in 1998 to help youth, Tamil youth, and the violence that was happening back then. And now we're more shifting our focus towards mental health. And I was sent here by my co-chair just to learn more and get some insight so I can bring it back to the board.
Super. All right.
Hi. Good evening. My name is Emily Chen. I'm actually coming from the Cross Cultural Community Services Association, TCCSA. I have been a board member 4 years ago, and this is the second time I came to the workshop. So I hope I can learn something regarding the board governance so that I can bring it back to my board members. And we are trying to revise our board manual right now. So this is very important that I bring all those material back to my board members so that we can update our board manual.
Great, perfect. Hi.
Hi everyone, my name is Rizal Lagazin. I'm a board member at Newcomers Women's Services Toronto. It's a small but mighty organization in the Danforth that focuses on 3 main programs, which is language. We provide language services, employment services, and settlement services for newcomer women in Canada. The reason why I took this workshop is because I'm interested in not just governance personally. I work in asset management during the day, and I know governance from that perspective, so I'm really interested to see how this is similar or different from a non-for-profit versus corporate space, and also we're focusing on governance in the board that I sit on. We're also working on our strategic plan, so I think this would go, the materials and the stuff that we learned today would go hand in hand with our current focus of the board.
Great. Hi.
Hi, my name is Basil Mawasi. I'm on the board of Tropicana Community Services. This is a community-based organization in Scarborough that looks forward to providing services mostly to, actually across all age groups, but we focus more on the youth and young people, with a very focus on the African Caribbean approach to the cultural settlement of the young people. And I'm on the board, and I think I was sent here because I'm the chair of the governance committee.
Yes, indeed.
But I'm quite familiar with the governance because I've been sitting on another board for maybe over 10 years. So I was joined Tropicana because they knew I had some governance experience to bring there. But I'm here because I think I want to learn from others. As you mentioned, governance is a very wide subject. So I'm hoping I can be able to pick some tips from those who are working in the governance areas and in your areas, in your own organizations. Let me get something new. And also from you, I'd like to get something that I can bring back to my board about the duties, responsibilities, and the role of individual board members on the board. And specifically, what are the expectations when one is appointed a board member and that kind of thing. Thank you.
Great.
Hi, my name is Diana Grimaldos, and I'm with Springtide Resources. I'm a board member, and I started in the board like 2 years ago, but I was off for a year, so I'm back this year, full commitment, and we are a very small board, so we're trying to build our capacity, and we were sent as to improve our knowledge about governance, and I'm really interested in see the different intersectionalities that an operational board can have towards a more management board, or how we'll be less operational and more policy oriented.
Great. Okay. And somebody came in. Hi there. Do you want to tell us your name and what organization you're with?
Symes 55 plus.
Oh, okay, awesome. And board member or staff?
Yes, board member.
Wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is pretty fantastic. I thought it would be more split staff and board members, but it looks like we have mainly board members, and does speak to the incredible volunteer capacity in the sector, right? That people come out on a Monday night from all over the city. Let's get going. We will definitely be talking about governance for sure, and we will get into, to some extent, into some of the interests that you've expressed around the board-ED relationship for sure, policies, procedures, strategic planning, individual roles and responsibilities and types of boards. Again, we're not getting into the weeds, but hopefully enough for you to get some direction and some ideas around what you may want to pursue further and what you can bring back to your organizations. From my perspective, if we could just go back one, in terms of good governance, when I think of good governance, there's two words for me that are critical. As the board, as what you're there to help an organization do. You're there to help it be successful, and we'll talk about what that means, and you're there to help it be sustainable, and we'll talk about that. So They're two very simple words, maybe, but they're so important and they're so full of meaning. So let's unpack them a little bit in terms of the next slide there. So in terms of success, what this means as the board, and this is so fundamental, right? You're there to help the organization determine that it's doing the right thing, right? And it's doing the right thing because it has a mission that you've articulated as the board. It has a vision that you've articulated. You know, the organization knows where it's headed, right? Over the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And you have a mission that's aligned with that vision. That's going to enable the organization to move closer and closer towards achieving that vision. As the board, you establish those values, that foundation for the organization, so that when people need to make decisions, they know what is informing those decisions. When people are either inside the organization or outside the organization, there is something that is guiding the way that they behave, the way they speak to other people, the way that they engage with others, the way they represent the organization, and that is informed by those values or by those principles. And so as the board, this is a huge part of your job. It doesn't happen very often, right? These are not things you do every year, but when you do them, and I do so much strategic planning, and I know some people think strategic planning, whatever, we create this plan and it sits over there, and but it's the heart and soul of the organization, right? And so as the board of directors, this is such a fundamental part of your work. And then related to that is your strategic plan. Over X period of time, 3 years, 5 years, you set the course for the direction in terms of what it will focus on to implements its mission, as it moves closer and closer towards that vision. And so increasingly, boards of directors are becoming more and more familiar with words like our key performance indicators, right? So as an organization, how do I know, as somebody who's legally responsible for this organization, how do I know that my organization is doing what we've said we were going to do? How do I know that what we stood up in front of our membership last year and said we were going to do, how do we know we're doing that? And those, increasingly, those key performance indicators are indicated in your strategic plan. And there will be a session on strategic planning. I think I'm facilitating it. So we're really going to get into that in great detail. But another fundamental part of success. Yeah.
Is there a best practice or common practice on the duration of a strategic plan?
Great question. I don't know off the top of my head. I know when I started, they were long, right? Yeah. And we worked on them for many years. And increasingly, they're shorter and shorter. And most of my strategic plans now are 3 years. And even within 3 years, I've just lost the word, and maybe Bill, like a board that's generative, right? So a board that can, yes, establish a strategic plan with clear targets and priorities for 3 years, but a board that's generative, that's able to every 3 months or every 6 months have this practice of staying on top of trends in the environment, right? And seeing what that means for your organization and your clients and your community, and looking at that strategic plan and seeing if there needs to be course correction, right? Or seeing if there's new opportunities that we need to integrate into our plan, and about what that means for those targets that we established maybe even just 6 months ago. And for sure, any organization that did their strategic plan a year ago better be course correcting, right? So, or not course correcting, but better be checking in, right? And better be open to that generative thinking process. So, and I don't know if that's a best practice, but in the organizations I'm working with, this is certainly the approach of, we still have our 3-year plans and our timelines, but trying to build in these continuous opportunities for reflection.
For what's worth, what I do as an executive director is when we do our strategic plan, I report monthly, and I use a pretty similar template than the one we use for the strat plan. Like if we're gonna have, let's say, program objectives, then I report monthly on program objectives and what happened, so that board members can see the strat plan and they can see monthly, if anything, not that all the items get done in a month, but at least they know which one, and that helps with the changing in timelines. And just to add that, in my experience, I have seen 3 to 4 years strategic plans. I've never seen anything longer than that. In my experience.
We're going to get a little bit, I'm glad you raised that, Harmy, because in a little bit we'll talk about under one of the functions of the board how you monitor your work, right? So we'll get to some of these tools that people use. Any other questions around success? Let's go to sustainability. So a little bit different. Maintaining the capacity, credibility, and viability, the words of the organization over a period of time so that it can carry out that purpose. And so capacity in terms of, does this organization have the resources, the skills, maybe the partnerships, the infrastructure to do what it needs to do? Does it have credibility? So you may have all of this, lots of money, a great space, maybe good staff, but nobody out there thinks you provide value, right? So some important thoughts then for the board. First the board needs to know that, and then needs to think about that. And then viability over time. Back to that trending, right? Are you in an industry that's viable over time? So if we're looking at something like, this is the inverse of what I'm trying to say, but if you think about seniors in our population and demographics changing, is your organization viable from the perspective that you're going to have something to do, right? You're going to have a population to serve. You're going to have services that the community needs. And this has been an interesting conversation for lots of organizations that are community-based and located in neighborhoods that have gentrified, right? So if we've been working in Queen East, Leslieville? Yeah, so if we were historically in Leslieville, and we knew it was a very high-need neighborhood 20 years ago, demographics have changed incredibly. What is the viability of your organization if you happen to be situated in there and your mandate is to work with particular groups that don't live there anymore, right? So lots of really important governance questions for a board of directors. So that's the other piece. Success, mission, vision, values, strategic plans, clear performance indicators, and sustainability, making sure that your organization has the resources, the infrastructure, the credibility, and a purpose, right, at the end of the day, that's sustainable. So in terms of a couple of questions, let's open it up. You do want to learn from each other and jump in. We're not going to go around to everybody, but curious, maybe let's start with a show of hands. When you joined the board, did you get a copy of the vision, mission, values pretty quickly? Yeah, and it's like no blame, no shame, right? So let's not worry about that. This is a good, safe space. So people got the mission, vision, and values. How was that, anybody jump in? How was that presented? Was it part of orientation? Was it separately? How did it work?
We had several new members join at the same time, and we have a whole orientation session for over an hour. We talked, we went through the main governance documents, so it was a very interactive.
Great, good. Okay, and did you have your hand up?
Yes, I was going to add that it was more of like homework for us to read the documents on top of the first board meeting that we attended.
Okay. All right. Others different from that? So orientation sessions, homework, readings. What else have people done or received in terms of the mission, vision, values, and strategic plan? Does everybody who's a board member know their strategic plan or their mission, vision, values. You don't have to rhyme it off, but you've seen it. People have seen it.
Well, it was already there on the
It was
website
there,
before
yeah.
even joining. So
You did your homework?
I did my homework,
Exactly.
and I liked maybe what I saw. That's why I joined.
Excellent. Okay. So that one, in my experience, most people see their mission, vision, values, their strat plans. It's part of orientation, as you said. How about this one? In my experience, this doesn't happen quite as regularly or consistently. So financial statements, has anybody not seen the financial statements of their organization?
No, the ED has to present it monthly.
Yes.
So that we know what's happening about the financing.
Yeah.
Of the association.
Okay, so it's part of your monthly report. Yeah. Okay, how about others? How do you see
every
it?
month.
Every month as well. Okay.
And the audit reports sent
And the audited
to all
report.
the members.
Okay. Others, how do you see financial statements or financial information, I guess, about the organization? Yeah.
Ours are presented at board meetings and then emailed in between.
And emailed. Okay. And are they FYIs? Do you talk about them? How does it work? Yeah.
Could I jump in?
Yeah.
Most of the
Do you
time.
want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone. My name is Vita. I'm an assistant coordinator here at OCASI, and I've sat for 2 years of my term on the board of my student union.
Oh, great.
Most of the time when we see financial statements would be for funding requests, and that would be the opportunity where board members then can inquire more and explore on which capital funding are we pulling that from, how much do we have left in our reserves, or whenever there are carryovers, or whenever funds are carried over is the most frequent time that we do see financial statements.
Yeah.
And a good way to stay on top of how they're being used.
So what association is doing that the ED has to email to the finance committee so that the members of the finance committee, they can review, and then when they have the board meeting, monthly board meeting, and then we can just see the report together, and if there is any question, we will ask the ED about the budget planning, or the actual that we spend. So it's very important that we have the finance committee to review all those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm asking questions around the finances because if we go to the next slide, your board members, you are responsible for your organization, the way it uses its finances, and that it uses those appropriately. And I hope every board member takes that really, really seriously. You all have liability insurance. Do people know that? It's not to scare you, right? But I think I think you understand that I value boards incredibly, but it does also mean that you provide a valuable service, right? So taking that role so seriously from the perspective of understanding the finances of your organization. And having worked with so many organizations and boards, and back to your question around best practice, there's no standard template. I wish there was. I'm often auditing organizations. Definitely having a committee that's looking over the books and providing a set of eyes to that, having an opportunity as a board to understand when there's variances, right, in terms of your financial statements, so not just seeing revenue, what the budget was and then expenses, but also where's their variance and what is that attributed to, right, and making sure there's time for that in your agendas, whether it's monthly or quarterly. As the board, you decide what that's going to be. But these are the reasons that we want to make sure that you're really understanding not just your financial responsibilities, but also those other responsibilities in terms of providing direction to the organization. So things to keep in mind is the organization is a legal entity. It can be sued, and that's why you all have it. That's why the board has its own insurance. It can own property. It's going to exist forever, just like any other corporation that's out there. And there will be somebody who knows this much better, who's doing a workshop on it in terms of some of the legal issues that you want to keep in mind. And then from a not-for-profit perspective, what differentiates your organization from other organizations is that your work is philanthropic, that you're not producing profits unless they're profits that have a social purpose attached to them, and then there's a whole set of policies around that. And you may be a not-for-profit, you may or may not have charitable status, so it gets even more complex depending on whether you have charitable status. Okay? And as I said, there'll be much more information about that. So the other workshop that's coming will also talk a lot about your fiduciary responsibility as board members. Essentially, because of the regulations around corporations and not-for-profit organizations, you do have, on the one hand, a legal relationship to the organization, and you have what we call an ethical relationship to the organization. And so there is an expectation as the board of directors that you will operate and behave according to certain principles and certain values. And some of those are here, and there may be others that your own organization has put in there, but these are the things that we would expect from board members, that you're going to be honest, that you're going to behave in good faith, that you have the best interest of the corporation at heart, and that's why we all have conflict of interest policies, right? So that it's really clear that when you make a decision, it's not because it's going to benefit you or your brother, your sister, your mother, it's really for the corporation and the interest that the corporation serves. That you're going to apply all your skills to the organization that you can, and exercise good judgment when you make decisions. Obviously comply with legislation, but that's why, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, you need to know the legislation, and you need to know the regulations that you need to be following, and the different the things that you need to be compliant with as an organization. So it's, I think, hopefully a lot of your EDs have a calendar in place, right, where they're informing you around the different legislations, regulations, and areas of compliance for the organization. Loyalty, important. Of course, you don't make a decision at the board meeting and then walk out of the room and behave in a way that is not consistent with that or badmouth your organization, right? Confidentiality, and everybody's signing off on confidentiality policies as well. It's really important that you're protecting your organization from that perspective. And you may have all of these things articulated in, sometimes boards have code of conduct policies, that's sort of the overarching policy, and then sometimes there's separate policies that discuss different perspectives. So there will be another workshop that will go more into the legal parts of this and how it plays out. That's a bit of an overview around some of the expectations from that perspective. I wanted to focus on accountability, because I think boards play an interesting role, right? You're that group that sits between the staff and clients and community, right? And you have a role to bring forward voices from the community. And often the board members represent the community in lots of different ways. And so you're in a unique position to be, on the one hand, understanding and bringing forward the needs and perspectives of the community, but also as the board, because ultimately you have that fiduciary responsibility, you're accountable to the community. And that's why when I said earlier, when you stand up in front of the membership and say something, that's really, really important, right? You're accountable to your different stakeholder groups. So clients, community members, funders, legislative or regulatory bodies, anybody else that you think is a key stakeholder group for your organization that we don't have up there.
Staff and the executive director.
Yeah, absolutely. Good one. Well, the ED in particular, for sure. Other stakeholders.
Members.
Go to the next slide. The members, yeah. And the members may be, clients and community members. They're usually not funders, and they're usually not your legislative or regulatory bodies, but often they could be clients and community members. Yeah.
Third-party organizations.
Yeah. Like examples, what would be that?
Some of the service provision that was provided to the student population wasn't done through the union itself, so we hired third-party organizations, advocacy groups.
Yeah, all your partners and allied service providers or stakeholders for sure. Even I don't, you call them third-party providers, but it could be like your
partnerships,
collaborations, but even your people who you have a service relationship with, right? The company that provides all your office supplies, the company that does all your shredding. Yeah, your vendors. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. So these are all different stakeholders that, as the board of directors. Bylaws are all different for sure, but do people have a sense of what obligations to these different stakeholders might be or might look like? What are some of the ways that you think the board is accountable to a different stakeholder group?
Are you referring to what's in the bylaws?
Or I mean, it may be in your bylaws, but just in general, how is the board? Are you accountable to clients or community members, for example?
So having the audited financial statements be received by the members, by hosting an AGM in accordance to your bylaws, following the bylaws, because those are the bare bones of what you have to comply with as an organization.
Even the services that the organization is bound to deliver commitments to all the funders also. They're funding something, they need to get value for it.
Yeah, so in your bylaws, for sure, there's a bunch of accountability spelled out there in terms of your annual general meeting, giving notice of those, how you conduct elections, how you recruit from amongst your membership or different stakeholders. And then to your point, accountabilities to your funders around targets or your contracts more generally, and reporting to your funders on a regular basis, but also reporting to your members, right? That if we did a strategic plan and we said that these were our targets or our key performance indicators or the outcomes we were going to achieve, to be able to report back in a way to all your members around your performance against those targets. Anything else around accountability? Nothing coming up right now. I asked about orientation earlier, so people oriented to their bylaws. Do you have a copy beside your bed somewhere that you're reading on a regular basis? People know their bylaws. And how about reviews? How often do people review their bylaws? What's the practice?
I think I'd say as needed. I mean, and this is kind of interesting because we had a couple of lawyers in our board membership, and a couple of we've always been told that at least we shouldn't be changing our bylaws that often because they're like our constitution. We should be adapting our bylaws. So we did actually a couple of changes on an annual basis for a couple of years, and then we kind of stopped. So it's one of those documents that it's important to have updated and reviewed by a corporate lawyer, but it's also, I think the message was, look at it as your constitution. You can really be changing it to accommodate some new needs, try to keep a balance. So that's a bit of a tricky area there.
Or how about reviewing to make sure you're in compliance with your bylaws, right? Like, so if you're, I know I work for another organization where I have to run the annual general meeting every year, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what was that time period again between end of fiscal year and the AGM? And it's in our bylaws, and going back to the bylaws, right, to make sure that we're in accordance with those bylaws. So things like that is a document that the board needs to know. You need to know what the rules are, to be checking in regularly to make sure that everybody's on top of them, right? Okay. Let me see if we got all the questions. I think we did. Any questions so far on anything that's been covered or has come up? Keep going. Okay, so we've started to go into some of the governance functions. So these are when we break down that fiduciary responsibility, your role for ensuring success and sustainability. These are some of the key functions. So just as your organization on the operational side has functions around finance and human resources and office administration and program delivery and fundraising and whatever else the key functions of your organization are, you as the board, as the governors, have functions that you're responsible for. You approve the strategic goals and objectives. We've talked about that a little bit already. And that's an important job. That is like setting the course for your organization. And when we do the strategic planning workshop, we'll talk a lot about different models and methods for doing that. Establishing a framework for performance oversight, very closely linked to establishing strategic goals and objectives. Yes, we can articulate 3 directions or 3 priorities, and we can go so far as to attach our SMART objectives to those, right? So in 3 years we'll do that, or in 3 years we'll do this, or in 3 years we'll finish that. But as Harmy said, do you have a framework for then managing the performance of your organization against those SMART objectives? And that framework might be, do you have quarterly targets? Or do you use a balanced scorecard so that you know on a quarterly or regular basis how you're performing? Are your objectives, and I use balanced scorecard because are the objectives that you've set out for the organization balanced? Are they looking at the different facets of your organization in terms of the needs of the organization from a people perspective, from a process perspective, from a client and community perspective, and from, of course, an accountability and sustainability perspective. So as the board of directors, wanting to make sure that as you're working through your strategic goals and your objectives and developing that framework for performance oversight, you have the health and well-being of the organization in mind, right? That what you're putting in place for a 3-year period is going to create that state of good health or balance for the organization. Oversee organizational effectiveness and quality. So in some ways related to that performance oversight, you're, as the board, wanting to know that what the organization is doing with its money, right, that you're accountable for, is having an impact. So if we spend $20 doing X, is it getting us closer to that vision that at the end of the day we've articulated for this organization? And this is hard stuff to figure out, especially in a not-for-profit setting, in an organization that's some of you may be service-oriented, some of you are community development-oriented, some of you are policy-oriented. Being able to measure those results is challenging, but nonetheless, as the board of directors, you go through these exercises on at least a 3-year basis to try to figure it out, right? So if we're saying this is an objective, how are we going to know that what we're doing is effective? And then increasingly, we're being asked to measure and assure quality. I come from a health background, and quality is something that we've spent a lot of time focusing on and trying to make sure that we're, and this happens so much, right? We want to do as much as we can with the money we have. So typically many organizations are fingers everywhere, right? But when I talk to staff all the time, they're wanting to find that balance with quality. So yes, let's try to do as much as we can with our money, but we want to do it well. We want to deliver the best service. I want to have the best skills. I want to be practicing leading practices. I want to practice from an equity perspective. I want to make sure that we're as accessible as possible, right? So all those other measures are really, really important as well. So as a board of directors, do you have a couple of things that you're looking at on a regular basis that show you that you're effective, that show you you're a high quality organization. And every organization may have some different indicators and measures. There's often many common ones, right, that people look at. But a big part of your work, for sure, these first three are a bucket, right? Financial, overseeing financial conditions and resources, we've talked about that. So in some ways attached to the strategic goals, objectives, priorities, if we're making some decisions about what we're doing as an organization, can we afford to do it? If we're making a decision to do something, where are we going to get the money, and are there implications? Does it mean that one part of our organization may not be as heavily resourced, or may be stagnant, or we may get rid of it because we've decided that this is where we're going to be applying our focus from a financial perspective. And then so that's like overseeing the financial resources and conditions, and then overseeing the financial management of the organization towards those financial goals, which we've talked about in terms of making sure that you have a really strong sense of your budgets, your expenses, your revenues, and where you're at on a regular basis. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? It's from I'm the treasurer also.
Yeah.
Why? Is there an expectation that when financial statements are being reviewed, they're also balanced against, let's say, the bank accounts?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I would write it down and hold on to it. It's not my area of expertise. Let's get back to you though, right? And I'm not sure if there'll be another workshop that's more focused on financial, and if not, there will be. Yeah, so hold on to some of those financial questions for sure.
Okay.
Okay.
What do you mean by balance with the account?
Reconciliation?
There is a, like, let's say, even if not monthly, a quarterly or semi-annual reconciliation between what the financial statement says and what's actually in the bank account. Because we see as a board what the financial statement says. However, because the board is normally not supposed to get into operations, how do you know, let's say, that you have $300,000, for example?
Yeah.
If you don't see the cash flow, the balance of the account.
So we produce the expense and revenue sheet, but also a balance sheet.
Great.
So I think the board would at any time be able to ask me to see a bank statement to say that the balance sheet is accurate. That they get both expense and revenue sheet and a balance sheet.
And I think this is where you get into as the board, what are your policies, procedures, practices, right? In terms what are your financial policies, procedures, and practices? And different organizations will have different things. So you have great
But
examples.
I guess I totally agree with you, and we also create a profit and loss comparison because it's important to see where the losses and the profits are in terms of revenues, I guess, in terms of
the variance.
So there are definitely ways that board members should be made aware of.
Thank you.
My expectation would be not only yes, I would say definitely. I think it better be provided. That comes from experience. Where I worked in an organization, and for a long time the AD was saying we need to raise more money, we need to raise more money. And until we went into the bank statements, within 3 months we realized $300,000 that we could just get from the organization. It was there. So I think yes, it's best maybe that you have both.
Because I asked for this, and I just want to make if am I like too unreasonable to ask for potentially for reconciliation of between.
I mean, you need to manage the risk of this organization, right? And really knowing where your organization stands financially is your right. It's your obligation. It's not your right. It's your job, right? It's your obligation. So back to making sure that you have in place a strong financial policy and processes and people on the board who really understand. Somebody has to understand the books, right, and the finances. And we do rely on our executive director, and you can and you should. but you need to be independent as well, right, and be able to understand your finances as well.
Just to add to her point, I'm not sure how your organization is structured, but
neither am I. I'm
we
telling you so.
we have a finance manager, and we make sure to have a sit down with the finance manager without the ED present, so it gives them a space to report anything that they think that may, that is of concern to them without the influence of the ED there.
Great.
And I find that having a direct line from the finance manager to the board, whether having an in-camera session with the finance manager, really helps you provide comfort in terms of that space where the ED's asking for 300K when you already have 300K in the bank, and that's something easily that you can ask your finance manager who has access.
The finance manager's position is I report to the ED. I don't report to the board.
That is a tension in lots of organizations, and we advise to have some separation
Thank
there.
you.
Not to go too deep into it, because I know it's not
Yeah,
the area we're
I'm
working,
sorry.
but I am an ED of a very small non-profit organization that cannot afford a finance committee. Oh, sorry, a finance manager. I have a finance
We don't
committee.
have.
So having said that, the structure we've created and that has worked really well with us is within our financial policies established that we have an accountant that comes to the office 4 times a year. She trains a bookkeeper that comes to the office once or twice a month. And the way it is that the accountant reports directly to the finance committee. So to your point, I forgot your name, sorry.
It's okay, Rizal. Hi.
Rizal, to your point, Rizal, it's important that finance committee have a line directly with operations that doesn't have to be the executive director.
That's great.
So that they can respond officially. It's a consultant, so they're hired directly by the organization and they can report directly to them. It has never happened that the finance committee has requested a meeting without me being present, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't happen. Like, it's part of what it's understood. So that, and the accountant understands that, and it's clear to her, it's clear to the finance committee, and it's clear to me. So there can always be that direct
And you're speaking to that really important, where is it, the board ED relationship, right? So we'll get into best practices in a little bit, but having a really strong board ED relationship and respecting each other's roles and rights and obligations, so that there's no question when the board seeks out their own financial consultant or expertise around areas where they have that accountability.
Thank you.
Sonia, we had one question from a webinar participant, Huda Bakari from the Arab Community Center of Toronto. She's asking what happens when the governance functions interfere with the daily operations of the agency.
Does she have an example? Because that could be so many things. And we're going to talk about board operations and we're going to talk about different kinds of boards in a little bit. So maybe we can hold on to it because I think it might get answered in a little bit, if that's okay. So don't remind me in about 20 minutes if we don't get there. So where are we here? Financial risk management. So I think we talked about that as well. Finance is one, but I just did a project with an organization that owns a building, and they rent out a lot of space in their building, and they've been losing tenants in their building, and this is causing strain and stress, right? So being as the board of directors, you need to know if things like that are happening, right? That you're losing tenants, which has an impact on your revenues, which has an impact on your ability to pay your mortgage and all those kinds of things. So having really strong risk management policies, procedures, processes in place, similar to financial, is important. Another really important function, and I think it doesn't happen as consistently as it should for both parties, for the board and for the executive director or CEO, is that supervision of leadership. As the board, you have one staff person, it's the ED. The ED has a big board that it reports to, but that relationship is really important, and being able to nurture it and take care of it is really important. We'll talk about that in a bit. Stakeholder relationships, really, really important. I think sometimes the board doesn't take advantage, right, of this unique position it's in to have these fundamental relationships with stakeholders in the community. So if you're an organization that does policy work, how do you as the board use all your networks to take advantage of people in all sorts of different positions to advance your policy priorities? Similarly, if you're a community development organization, how do you use all the different relationships that between 12 board members have so many relationships, so how do you leverage all of those to support the community development aims of your organization or your service delivery aims? So that's one way to think about your role as a board, and then the other part of it is just nurturing all your different stakeholder groups, which we talked about earlier, but through your annual general meetings, through the way you report back to the community, the way that you appear as a board. Are you accessible in the way that you hold your annual general meetings? Is it business, something that you want to deal with, or is it really an opportunity for you to connect with the community and deepen those relationships that you have with the community? The funders as well, right? Like back many years ago when I worked in an organization, the board members, it wasn't a fundraising organization, but board members annually hosted a potluck for all the funders of the organization because they wanted to have a direct relationship with funders, which maybe this is part of the question, right? But it wasn't to interfere with that project in any way, right? Or to influence that project. It was to demonstrate to the funder that this board knows what the organization is doing, knows who our funders are, knows what we're accountable for, and values the trust that funder has in the organization and in the board of directors. So a really important function that I think there's so much opportunity there we don't often take advantage of. And then yourselves, the last really important function. You're an entity, and one of your biggest jobs is to manage yourselves as a board. And we'll get into the details of that and the best practices of that. So those are some of the key functions. Is there something there that you think is a huge part of your work as a board that hasn't been reflected in anything that we've talked about so far? Anything missing? Yeah.
I'm not sure if this actually is part of your question, but I just wanted to mention that a lot of the points that you've stated there are so important, and yet small organizations like mine, for example, never had funds for it. Like, for example, evaluation. How important it is to make sure that what you're doing is impactful, that you're using your funds the most efficient way. Especially organizations like mine, I don't provide direct client services, so how do I evaluate if the policy change that I just supported for the past 2 years and it won, and how it will impact every woman out there who's experiencing violence. Yeah. So it gets really complex, and yet we want to do it, but that's the kind of a specialty that we never get funding for. Projects don't give you funding for any of those things, and it's so, like you said, it's so now in the language of funders. Like, they want to see how much of an impact you have, and yet you don't have, at least not, I know, I can only speak on my own organizations. Rarely you get the evaluative component funded or even allowed to apply on a particular project. I think lately we're seeing that more and more, where before we never saw it. So that's one point that I want to add, that it often falls into the volunteer work that you try to find, but it's important to notice. And secondly, the other piece around financial conditions, just recognize that it all changes with the political landscape. I know those who are provincially funded these days were promised certain money from the former administration that they may not get this fiscal year, and yet they added it because they were told they were going to get it, and now they don't have it. And so I just wanna make things a little bit more complex than what it really is, because those who are in charge of operations know how much something can change in a question of minutes when someone decides, no, we're not funding this anymore, and so you're already into the fiscal year. But regardless, the points that you've mentioned there are so important. I just wanted to add the piece that I wish it was as
easier.
easy as
Yeah.
it looks in terms of
And I say none of it lightly. I know these are, each one of them is a job that, not job, but a function that requires money, right? And requires capacity and skills. Absolutely, and I think this is one of the reasons, I'm assuming this is one of the reasons OCASI went after this funding from the city to try to support some of the organizations that don't have a lot of capacity, at least a little bit, to build a little bit more, right, capacity in some of these areas. And yeah, I don't know what to say for sure. It's so hard.
And I don't
usually
expect,
can't even afford to do strategic planning,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
When you're so small,
organization.
and it's all volunteer based, and then the staff itself would be so small, and you expect all of that, right? Even though it exists, like I said, so many things exist, but just we don't have enough resource to even communicate everything we have to anybody.
Yeah.
It's hard.
I know.
Nevertheless,
you're
my
trying to do
intention
the
was not
service.
to. It's on the contrary. I think it's good for people to know exactly, and board members,
Yeah.
exactly what we are, or we expect from you
Yeah.
from the operations side. But
Yeah.
totally, you know.
I mean, it's also a reason, I'm not also trying to like sidetrack our conversation, but it is the reason why it's important to have venues like this where you learn from each other, right? And then try to find ways to not replicate the wheel, or find ways to pool your resources where you can to collaborate around. Just as we do on the service delivery side, is there a way to collaborate around sharing financial policies and procedures, right? So that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that can address every issue, but can help to support some organizations to get some easier access to the resources that they need. I'm going to keep going if that's okay. So next slide. Let's get we're drilling down, right? We're going to keep going in terms of now the conditions for good governance. So we talked about the functions. How do we start to deliver on those, right? And there's, from my perspective, what do we do as the board? So these are the areas where you exercise your governance role and your approach to that governance role. Who? So board quality often is about the who. It's about the skills of the people that are at the table, not as individuals, but collectively. And then how? Through your board structure and your policy. So we've already started to talk about these things in different ways. Let's keep going. So in terms of, I should put up some paper here so you can't see these ones. Let's focus on one at a time. So let's look at board role for a minute, and breaking these down into, if we have these things in place, we're setting the conditions that we require to have a strong board of directors, to have a strong governance practice in our organization. So under board role, that the role and the function of the board as a collective is spelled out. That everyone, all 12 or 8 or 15 board members, have a common and similar understanding of what they're doing at the table, and those functions that we just talked about, right? So those of you who said you're here to learn and take stuff back, that's your job, right? Is to make sure that your colleagues at the table have the opportunity to discuss what the role is, and that you all understand it the same way. And then the more, and I think somebody asked about this, in addition to the work of the board as a whole, that individual directors on the board understand what their responsibilities are. And there are individual responsibilities and accountabilities as well. And that you have an effective governance to governance relationship, so that the board is, that the relationships between the board are effective, and you're able to work in a productive and a collaborative way. And that's often where we have, as I mentioned earlier, those code of conducts. Policies and procedures are really important, and why the linking over here, the role of the chair often becomes quite important, or the executive. And that we have effective management, governance and management relationship. Okay, so in terms of the board's role, if we can establish policies and procedures for these, it helps to bring clarity to this really important component of this bucket of good governance. In terms of board quality, what we're talking about here is the board articulating what its ideal size is, and there's no rule for this. Every organization is different. There's, I think, a minimum in CRA. What is it? 2, 3, 4. I can't remember. The legal person will talk about that. But there's no rule that says you have to be 12 people. Every organization can decide what their optimal size is, and you articulate that in your bylaws usually. And also composition. Again, there's no hard or fast rule here. As an organization, you assess what your needs are and try to recruit members who bring the kinds of skills and competencies that you need to the board. But that can differ from organization to organization, depending on what your mandate is. At the same time, you probably want to have some general expertise at the table. So finance, we've already talked about. Legal, human resources, right? Those 3 pretty fundamental skill sets that every organization needs. And then increasingly, risk. So having somebody on your board who really knows risk and corporate risk and organizational risk. Quality, having a quality expert at the table or somebody who understands planning, evaluation, quality, that whole bucket. Increasingly important, right? So that, and then at the same time, you're not-for-profit, community-based board. So wanting to make sure that your board reflects to some extent the people that you're mandated to serve or the issues that you're mandated to address. And those do intersect, of course. Recruitment, so back to your bylaws, usually within there you articulate what your recruitment policies and procedures are. And you want to make sure that you're following those, right? And reviewing them and then following them on a regular basis. Terms and renewals really clearly laid out, and this is important in terms of individual board members understanding their responsibility, that when I sign on to a board, I know that I've signed on for a 2-year term or a 3-year term, and I know that I can be asked to come back for 2 terms or 3 terms, and really being clear about that. I would say there's probably not a lot of boards left that have no limitations around this stuff anymore, but there used to be, right? They used to be on a board for 25 years and nobody would ask questions about that, and you can understand that can lead to some stagnancy, right? Where there's not fresh perspectives coming into an organization.
Is this a bylaw that the organization made, set out? Like the terms and how often?
It's in the bylaws usually.
Yes,
should be.
But is it something? It's not something
bylaw?
Legal.
I don't know. Does anybody know? Again,
is it something?
Put it on your list for the legal, our legal management consultant.
Like, is it like maybe it's required by the non-profit? You know, by the federal whatever.
Sometimes some
charity.
organizations are started by these individuals who are so committed to them, are very passionate about what the organization is, and becomes a problem to get rid of them because they are there. They are the anchor of the whole organization. They have kept it going for the last 10 years. They are now retired. They have all the time to come and interfere on a day-to-day basis. How do you?
That's why you need that bylaw to get rid of them.
You can't get rid of them.
That's why you have to put bylaw, no more than 2 times.
But they created the bylaws when they started this organization, these individuals, and they conveniently did not have that in place. So sometimes you might have to kick them out first, then get the laws, then maybe ask them whether they can come back.
This is real life, absolutely, absolutely. I worked for an organization that was founded by 4 people who, the issues were dear to their hearts, but then what happens is, and I think somebody asked about board interfering with operations, there's no more divide, right, between the board's job and the operations of the organization. So as organizations mature, they often go through these sometimes incredibly painful challenges that ultimately, in my experience, the board steps up, right? Like something happens and the board steps up and has to make changes and put in place policies and procedures to ensure that the collective is preserved, right? Moving forward after the founders leave, because they eventually do. But those are the real life scenarios. That's why we want to make sure we have as much of a solid foundation in place as we can.
Now, on the other side of the coin, though,
Yeah.
if you don't have a bylaws that provide some sort of information about how to ensure transition or proper transition, it's another risk you can face, because if nobody knows what happened, what was agreed, and if you don't have proper documentation, policies as to the meetings and so forth, then you risk it as to really not having someone who is there to oversee. And so I think that's important to consider as well. I know that this may answer or not your question, but usually within the bylaws, it's
we do have bylaws. Say only 2 terms, only 3 terms. And
that's right,
2 years,
and then you stagger them
years,
so that they continue,
Absolutely.
right? And so that you know that there's someone holding a certain level.
But I just want to know if it's legal. Like, is it something that you have to have it, or is it just something that whoever's create this organization have, when they create a bylaw, they put it there as a guideline for themselves. It's like not a legal thing that they have to have.
I think whether it's legal or not, and we'll find out, it's a best practice, right? And a leading practice. And you can see why, if you have, and I like that you said it's term renewal and then succession planning, right?
Yes.
That if you have these conditions in place, you are then you're then you're then starting to look at organizational risk management, right? So putting those different conditions in place, there's a reason we talk about those things, because it helps these functions to be undertaken much more smoothly.
I think the most important thing is the succession plan. If you don't have a succession plan, when the old board member they leave, the new board of directors, they don't know what to do. That's another
succession terms, staggering, all those things together, right? Help to protect the organizational memory and movement forward.
Yes.
Sonia, I have a quick question for you. It might not belong here, but did you have any free tool for succession planning for executive directors or CEOs that you can share?
I have templates and processes for sure. Let me go through and I can share them with Emily.
Okay. That'll be helpful.
Because I think for the board of directors, in the work I've done, it's usually you would look at those things together, your board succession plan, your ED succession.
We'd love to see what you have, but we have all that in place, but we just want to see.
Yeah, you want
let
to compare,
the board,
right?
Yeah,
Best
compare,
practices,
see if it's,
Absolutely. And amongst yourselves, right? I think this is like a great venue to also share your own policies and procedures, and where somebody has something, the other person doesn't, but the other person has that, and you can begin to pool those resources. So where are we here? Orientation and education. We talked about that already in a couple of instances, that the quality of the board is so dependent on the board's access to information, right? And its knowledge and understanding of the organization and all the different processes. So that's orientation. And then education. How many people do have monthly education sessions for the board, or a professional development plan for the board, or learning sessions for the board?
We know.
Or you get okay, let's scale it down. Or you get emails inviting you to attend events that will contribute to your learning. Okay, good. Okay, so they may be attached to the learning goals of the board as a whole, or they may just be more random, right? That they're of interest because they're aligned with your mandate. But really, I would be advocating, and you'll see we'll get into evaluation, that just as you should be doing regular evaluation of the board's performance, you would do an annual learning plan and then check in against your learning goals on a regular basis.
Do you have materials for that too?
Yeah.
That you
I,
can share?
if I don't have them, I'll direct, like I'll find direction,
Okay,
like somewhere to direct you.
Evaluation of the board of directors.
Yeah, evaluation tools, I'm sure that, if not evaluation of the ED, evaluation of the board, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so even after every board meeting, do you do a quick survey, right? How'd it go? What did you like the most? Annually, of course, do you do an evaluation of the board and what was accomplished and what needs to improve, and but not, if we're looking from a continuous quality improvement perspective, do you want to wait a year, right, before you check in with each other to say how things are going? Hopefully you can always talk freely amongst yourselves anyway, but it's good to do that more structured feedback. So structure and processes, the last bucket of conditions for good governance. Your leadership as on the board. We typically have a chair and officers, and just as the board as a whole needs to understand its role and individual board members need to know what their roles and responsibilities are, chairs and officers really need to know their role and responsibility in there, and they're important, right? The chair has a particularly interesting role, which is to ensure that the board meets in an efficient way. It's probably not always something that the chair wants to hear, like it's not the sexiest job, right? That your boards are run efficiently and they start on time and they end on time, and you need to keep the board members in check, but if that doesn't happen, the board can't get its work done, right? And I think we've all been at 4-hour board meetings where you're like, why am I here, right? And why isn't the chair doing their job, and all those things. So really important, the chair. Treasurer, we've talked about, really important job. Secretary, co-chair, if you have a co-chair model. Committees, and we'll speak about the kind of board you have and how many committees you have in a minute, right? We used to have lots and lots of committees, a committee for everything, and over time have reduced that to be really, really critical about, not critical in a bad way, like critically thinking about what our organizations require in terms of committees, and to not have more than we need, and to make sure we have the essential committees from a risk management perspective, a financial management perspective, and a quality assurance perspective. And what else is there? Committees and meeting processes. Kind of connected to what I was just saying around the chair's role, you want your meetings to be run efficiently. There should be a calendar, right, of board meetings. There should be agendas that are standard, that you know exactly what to expect from meeting to meeting. Some things change from month to month, but it's pretty routine and standard. And those align either with your reporting requirements, your legislative requirements, or some of the key initiatives that are going on in your organization at any point in time. And then relationships and culture. Sorry, that's the last one there.
I have a question back to the other slide. That's the one. You mentioned the need for policies, defining the board role. What is the best practice in the development of these policies? How do they evolve? I mean, is it the ED who does the draft, gives them to the board? Is it a board committee? Do you bring a consultant? How do you go about this?
Great question. I mean, back a little bit to Harmy's point, how much money do you have, right? Or can you tap into volunteer resources in the community? It is the board's work, right? So it is the board that should be driving its policies, but the board is volunteers. We understand that, and not necessarily bringing the expertise in all the different areas that your policies need to cover. So, like, what I would think might be a fantastic situation is to have a policy committee or your executive committee or your governance committee of the board, the owner of this project, right? And so if it's the governance committee saying we're doing an organizational review of our policies, if you can hire a consultant or someone with expertise, that's fantastic. fantastic, or a volunteer who brings that expertise, or recruit a board member who loves this kind of stuff and can really get on it, and give yourselves a timeline because it's going to take a while to go through all your policies. And then essentially what you go through them, right, and review every single one of them and make sure they're up to date in terms of legislation, requirements, the organization. The ED is the staff support. You can, as the board, ask the ED to support you with the policy work if they happen to bring particular expertise to the table or knowledge or have the capacity. They don't own the policy, right? So at the end of the day, it's the board that's going to review it and approve it. And that's why I would say, like, get that outside expertise to help you with it if you want to go through it faster and make sure that it's right, it's done right. Okay. Yeah, let's go. Oh, I did want to talk about relationships, right? So culture, we do, and this goes a lot back to that effective ED relationship, effective board-to-board relationship, effective board to your stakeholders relationship. I think it is really important to nurture yourselves and pay attention to acting in the way you want your organization to be seen, right, by everybody who comes into contact with you. And that's why those evaluations are important and those moments to reflect on how the board has worked and functioned over the last year. Governance models. So somebody talked about this is I don't really like my slide, my diagram here, but I couldn't find another one to replace it before today. So we'll work with it. Hopefully it'll make sense. So there's all sorts of different models, and so when I started, we talked about working boards, and those were your operational boards. Boards were often founding an organization, and there were no staff or part-time staff or volunteer organization, and boards had to do everything, right? They had to write the policies, they had to hire the staff. Often they met with the staff to give the staff direction, sometimes delivered the services. But those are in the early days usually of an organization's growth and development. And it can work for a while until an organization gets to be a certain size or until an organization is a certain number of years old, right? Because over time it should be acquiring some maturity. But absolutely, that's how the not-for-profit sector was founded and continues to grow, is through those efforts of working boards. So I think we need to value them, but we need to understand where they fit, right? And when they work and when they stop working. So as an organization grows over time and builds competencies, right? Usually the involvement of the board at an operational level decreases, and the board becomes much more focused on those functions we talked about earlier. So managing the vision and mission, not managing, setting the direction of the organization through mission, vision, values, and the strategic planning process, making sure that it's hired an executive director that can implement that vision and mission and those strategic priorities, receiving regular reports from the executive director in terms of the performance of the organization financially and from a strategic directions perspective, managing some of those stakeholder touch points through your annual general meeting and potentially through some of your other work. So still involved potentially in some operational decision making depending on the skill sets that are available in the organization, but less and less. And then eventually you move, as organizations are quite large and quite complex and quite established and have a lot of competency, to boards that are really focused on their fiduciary role and on policy, right? Really establishing what we would say are the ends of an organization. These are our ends. This is what we're here to achieve. hire the executive director, the CEO to make it happen, and those are often your boards that are also doing a lot of fundraising, stakeholder relations, political negotiations, like all those kinds of things to sustain the organization over time. Does that make sense? So let's we do have a little bit of time. I'm going to go away from that picture for a minute, but let's hear from each other. I know a lot of you are from smaller organizations. Where do you think your organizations are situated on that matrix? Are you how many people would say that they're a pure policy board or a Carver board, as we say? Anybody in that kind of an organization? Yeah. So what does that look like? Feel like?
It's interesting because to be this tiny, super tiny organization, I'm brave enough to say that I am purely policy board. And I think that the reason I say that is because there is a clear line between operations and policy. And it's clear that the board function is only policy. However, and the reason why I wanted to share this with you all is because there will be times when I, for example, engage boards in conversations that are operational.
Yeah.
And I do it purposely, and I am clear when I am about to engage in that. And I think that is that has been a little bit of the magic wand for me, because there is no set golden rule. Even if you think you are purely policy, there will be questions that you as an ED will have, or I have, and I have experts on the board, and I want to use that knowledge, and I want to be able to pick their brain. Okay, this is how our budget looks for this fiscal year. This is what I want to propose because of this. What do you think? And I would say I get it. This is operations, but I want to hear because you have the, I don't know, financial expertise, or this is the HR policy that I want to amend this way, and this is what the consultant told us. What do you think? I think that the goal, or what has worked for me is to be honest and clear as to when it's operations, and be able and be okay to have those conversations.
Yeah.
Be okay to be in that gray line for a little bit, and then go back to, but this is what you're proposing to the full board.
I mean, it's interesting because, can you go to the diagram? Because yes, you may be tiny, right? However, you can likely have those kinds of conversations because it's a mature organization. The people in the organization understand what a policy board is, what an operations board is, understand their role, and there's I'm just imagining, right? There's likely, and you said, there's a good relationship between the board and ED, so you can have very transparent, honest conversations that don't end up messing things up, right? I think if you're a newer organization that doesn't have that practice, right, of being a policy board or understanding what the difference between different board models are, and you don't have a good relationship between the board and the ED, starting to play around with policy on the one-day policy board, second-day operational board can get
Messy.
Really messy for everybody. But if you're established and mature and competent and understand boards and board structures and have that good relationship, that can work.
Can I just add one last point, that the board members hold themselves accountable, and it would not be unusual to hear board members to say, I think that's operational. Can we kind of have a bit of a conversation about if that's operational or not at the board meeting level? So I think that's helpful too, because it allows me to intervene and say, yeah, that could be a gray area, we can take it back.
Yeah.
So having that permission and having that opportunity, I think, has worked for me anyways.
Yeah.
So I wonder how you got to that point, because my experience, and Anne is my colleague here, is completely opposite. So we work at an organization that's 35 years old. This year is our anniversary, and they are a complete operational board. They have zero, in my experience working with them, they have zero trust in the staff. They are involved in every single operation, every single decision we make, whether it's what kind of pen we're going to buy or
Oh my gosh.
can we close for a weather closure.
And the board members enjoy this?
I don't know why, but I'm curious how you get to that point. If it's as simple as just having your policy support that type of board, having how you get there. If that organization, I'm familiar with the organization, so I don't know if it's always been like that.
Well, I've been working for the organization I represent. I should be clear about that actually. Yeah, I've been there for, oh God, I started in 2008.
Okay.
So it's been 11 years. And in my experience, it actually helped, to be quite frank, to, when I joined the organization, to be, believe me or not, maybe I was too naive or too innocent, I don't know, to ask questions at the board level. You know, now that I'm here, is this what you are planning to discuss at the board level or not? Because I'm confused. I would read I would come to that meeting with that lens of not, and I honestly was not knowing, and so that of course probably forced a bit of the conversation as to no, we shouldn't, and then you have new members that joined and they had fresh views too. So it wasn't smooth all the time, but I think that what it always worked from the time I started is that people was open to hear those questions and okay, maybe we need to think about that. I mean, maybe it's too operational, and I've had probably a good 8 members come and go between the time I started and now. But I think having that permission to agree that we will not always know it all, or maybe we need to look at things, worked. And I don't want to I don't want you to think that it's always been so perfectly and beautiful. It hasn't. I think it's about recognizing that there are areas that we will need to discuss.
But also it depends also on the quality of the board and the skill set that they're bringing. I work with a board where there are at least maybe half the board is retired people, and I'm working during the day. I go to a board meeting and these guys want to discuss until 11 o'clock. They have the time, they are retired, they have no issues. Half of the board, on the other hand, are people who have been working since 9 o'clock, 6 o'clock. By 8 o'clock, they have almost switched off. They have no time to go into operations. In fact, quite often, they are the people who guide the agenda, and they are saying, is this item necessary to come to the board? Why is it being brought to the board? What are your expectations? Are you asking us because you want us to endorse a decision that you have already made? Or what is the deal? And I think if board members start asking those questions right from the time the agenda is set, and say, ask yourself, why is this item on the agenda? Should I deal with it, or this is something that can be handled by the ED directly? Why should it come to require a board decision? At that point, then you realize that the board becomes less operational. They have not that. But also it depends on who are you bringing on board right from the beginning. I suffer the other consequence, the other side of it. In others, I've got very highly qualified people, accountants, CPAs, and former finance directors, and legal people who have run their own things. But they have not gotten out of that shell yet. When they come to the board, they are still finance managers, they are still finance directors, and they want to delve into things. So you could get a situation where people, these board members, passionate as they may be for the mission, the vision of the organization, but they tend to bring you back. As the ED, they bring you back because they spend so much time delving into issues that you can deal with yourself directly. But if they stick maybe to the more decision-making issues, it will help.
Let's go here and then over here.
So wouldn't the strategic plan kind of guide where the board should be going, and whether it should be in the next 3 years be more policy versus operational, unless there's a key performance indicator on them being very much involved in decision making on the operations piece. But I think that's where the culture change could come down the line from like 5 to 7 years, where you're slowly bringing key things in, where you're guiding the organization to be more one or the other, depending on where you want to go.
Let's get a couple more and then we can try to. Did you want?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the
pictures.
To the picture. Because I think based on people's experience also with boards, like for example, we have been in transition for the last couple of years. Not that we only have a whole new board members, but we also have a new ED. And you're right, we're following that strategic planning, but it kind of like we were close to become a policy board, and then we lost our ED. We have to hire a new person, and then we lost a lot of our long-term board members, and you're bringing a new perspective in. So you go back to management board. It depends of funding. I was in another organization when I joined in because it was a management board, and then we end up being an operational board, and so it does change. It kind of going
Yes.
in a spiral.
And I think what you're suggesting is, are you as the board explicit about how you're behaving, right? Because it's absolutely appropriate if you are a policy board, you've lost your ED, hopefully you had a succession plan, maybe you didn't, and you've lost a lot of board members, hopefully you had succession plans, maybe you didn't, but it is absolutely appropriate to say, you know what, we have to go back here for X amount of time because our organization needs this. From a risk management perspective, from our fiduciary perspective, we need to kick in and do this, and this for 6 months with our plan to go back here, right? Within a year or whatever. But it's being really explicit about what you're doing. It's more if, no one's being critical or thoughtful or asking questions about what kind of an organization and board this is. And I think our funders have increasingly been asking us to get mature, right? That's why you're at these kinds of sessions. So now if you could go back, and I can definitely you can find if you go to this guide under understanding the board's role and directors' expectations from a best practices perspective, the board does spend time asking itself what kind of a board it is. You shouldn't be many years of meeting and doing stuff without reflecting on what kind of a board we are. Do we all agree that this is the kind of board we want to be? Do we understand the differences, right, between these kinds of board models? And not that you need to be experts, but within a strategic plan, you can say we're going to spend 1 year getting educated about different board governance models. In year 2, we're going to make a decision about what's best for this board and this organization. Year 3, we're going to transition to that kind of a model, right? But there has to be that opportunity to ask questions. And one more thing, and then you're there. The EDs, when you get a new ED, if I was an ED coming into an organization, it'd be my first question: what kind of a board are you, right? How are decisions made? What's my rights? What do I expect? So, in terms of the evolution of an organization over time, there's lots of things that start to happen to move you forward, and it can be, hopefully some of those things start to happen so that there's change. Go ahead.
Are you always trying to move towards policy board, or is it fine for some organizations to stay at the management board level?
Yes, I think it's back to being really explicit, right? Like why, what are our different options, and what is best for our organization, and what from a sustainability, perspective, what's going to make the most sense. And there are a lot of policy, you can see on the document, it's like a bit of a hybrid model. So there are a lot of organizations that, and I think it can work really well. So community development and policy organizations are a great example, where you have a board committee that's your social justice committee. Not very typical, right? In a Carver board, you don't have almost any committees. But this is a social justice committee because the board wants to direct the social justice or advocacy priorities of the organization. And that's often why so many of us join boards, right? Because we are very passionate about poverty or or violence or whatever the case might be. And so that is an absolutely appropriate decision for the board to make, and then the organization puts in place a structure to facilitate that and support it. So I think, like, for me, it's to be really, really thoughtful about the decisions that the board is making, so that you're all on the same page about it, understand it the same way, work together towards it.
I would like to share one little tool that it may sound not very important or significant, but it really helped me. And it's just in terms of our colleague who was asking, did you bring this here for discussion or for approval? I had the same confusion initially, and what I did is on the agenda, I simply put one heading that says for discussion only, for information only, and then I put the items that are for discussion so that they know I'm not asking you to approve anything here. This is just for you to know. And then I add another one that are the items for approval.
Yep.
And then I add them there, and that little change in my agenda helped me a lot to advance on the items faster than it happened before. I had that clarity there.
Yeah, and think about it. If you start to structure your where's my meetings, use board meetings properly. It's somewhere in here. If you are working as a board that is supposed to have a strategic plan that you're monitoring, that's on your agenda every month. If you're a board that is taking its fiduciary responsibility seriously, you need to look at the financial statement and approve it or not approve it, right? Like, that has to be on your agenda. If you are a board with a learning plan, you need to be having a presentation by the ED or somebody else about a policy issue in your environment that is impacting your organization. So, for example, tomorrow, apparently, healthcare in this province is being exploded. That better be on the agenda at everybody's next board meeting, right? So there's 3 items on your agenda. 4, if you are a reflective board committed to continuous improvement, you're doing your survey, right? So between those 4 items, that's a 2-hour meeting almost, and we haven't checked off any of the other risk management
Can you mention them again,
agenda
please?
items based on like legislative compliance, right?
What are the 4 items? Sorry.
Strategic plan monitoring, financial monitoring, learning,
Policy,
like your policy and external policy environment issues, self-evaluation. And so lots of executive directors, supported by the chair, right, will put out materials to the board in advance with all the FYIs and so-called discussion items. You need to read that. Like, that's so back to what is my understanding of a director's expectation. I've come to a board meeting. I've read everything. We're not even discussing it, actually, because there's more important things to discuss, which are my job as the director, which is the strat plan, the finances, the policy environment in my world, and my family, which is my board, right? That I need to take care of. So that's where we start to evolve to over time.
So in the case of some of these boards, what do you do if people don't read the FYI? What do you do with these board members who aren't
Where's your
coming
chair?
to the table?
Back to the chair's rules. So where you go up to our boxes. The other way. Oh, although that was good. Where's that code of conduct? So this is at the back. There's probably stuff in there. So the chair's role is really important. Hopefully everybody has a strong chair, right? Because the chair's role ultimately is to support the board with the code of conduct. I've spent time with boards who, again, this should be somewhere in your policy binder, where every 3 years you commit to reviewing your code of conduct. But code of conduct would include be on time for meetings, respect the meeting time. We start at 6, we end at 8, right? Read everything in advance. This is borrowed from somebody here. What else? Prepare in advance for all board and committee meetings. I guess like the point is these things don't magically happen, right? Just like anything in your personal life, typically things don't magically happen. We plan for them, we prepare for them, we write down expectations on each other, and we talk about it, and need to work through the hard stuff, which is back to like the evolution of boards. Sometimes we work through hard stuff. But yeah, definitely the chair then holds people accountable for the code of conduct. So this is 3 times you've been at a meeting, you haven't read anything, obviously not in front of everybody, but you know, we've then gone half an hour over every time because we've had to like go down the rabbit hole, right? So the chair is really important in terms of holding people accountable.
Do we have any template for the board manual, or is up to the association itself? So
There's lots of board manual templates around. I'm sure there's probably one of the resources in here somewhere. I'll write it down. I'll see. I'll like refer you to it. Like there's so many board.
Yeah, because we are still try to revise and working on it. So I'm just wondering whether we may have something that is helpful.
I mean, unfortunately, you can't take somebody else's manual and just
of course, yeah,
make it
just
your own, but there's definitely
just use some of the
absolutely and adapt it for your own environment. Let me just make sure that we've covered stuff off here.
Will you be mailing this as well? The presentation?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, absolutely. It's available by email. Okay, so let's keep going. Yeah, go ahead.
No,
a few more minutes.
Just one practice that our previous co-chair used to do, like every 2 months, she'll call in just to have a phone conversation to check in as a board member what your role is, and also explore potential leadership. Because I think once you want to make sure that your board it is complying with the code of conduct, but also you wanted to keep them engaged and active as much as they can. So if they haven't come to a meeting, like, you know, are there any adjustments that needs to be made to their timings? Yeah. So it's just to keep that momentum going as a new chair. Like, I think that would be something that might be helpful.
And one of the reasons I like working with boards around governance in particular is because it is so fundamental to build your capacity and your strength in this area. And especially now, and I think this is definitely going to be the case move. So how many people are provincially funded organizations? Okay, so federal, you may be okay for a little bit. So provincially, we know, right? Consolidation. The government is going to be eliminating contracts with service providers. And which contracts, we don't know what it's going to look like, but as boards, if you are strong, if your organization is strong in terms of your governance models, your policies, your procedures, your finances, right? If your house is clean and it's in order and you operate efficiently and effectively, you can be in a stronger negotiating position, right? And I'm to be very clear, like I'm talking about mergers and acquisitions and organizations being eliminated, because these are the conversations I'm having with every organization these days. And I think as the board, you need to know, right, that these are the conversations that organizations are, if not having already, will certainly be having in the next little bit. So as the board, it is your job to first understand that that's the environment, understand what's the implication for your organization, and have you done everything that you need to do for your organization to position it for to be as strong as possible, right? Negotiating this environment as we move forward, because that's back to success and sustainability. That's why you're there and a member of that organization.
I want to bring you back to the previous slide.
Sure.
And I think this is a two-part question. So what do you do when you have a weak chair?
Yeah.
That's one. Or if you're an what do you do when you have a weak board? I mean, you have all this. What any pointers as to?
I don't know what the art and there's no science, right? This is that combination of art and science. It's hard. So if you have a weak chair, that's really hard. This is where it's you have to start to have conversation. So if you're the ED and you have a very weak board across the board, hopefully you're an ED that's going to be having a pretty important role in the next membership, in the next recruitment process, right? And recruit board members who bring some of the skills and competencies that are in your bylaws or in that the board says that it needs to move forward. So you can start to use your role as the staff to the board to say, hey, do we need this kind of board? Do we need that kind of person on our board? And support the board to recruit, right? Board members who might bring some of those critical skills to the table. And that change will happen over time as new board members come on board and start to ask good questions, right? But it's a long-term process. And then if you're in an organization where your chair is weak, it's the same sort of thing, right? Whereas the ED, you're going to be hopefully somehow bringing to the board's attention its need to take care of itself and make suggestions and recommendations that maybe we need to do board surveys more regularly, maybe we need to do some governance training more regularly so that the board starts to better understand what the whole role of the board is. And then there's going to be an election, right, for a new chair every year. So the board as a whole, if it starts to develop its capacity, can start to articulate what it wants in a chair. But again, it's slow. I know, like in reality though, we also have conversations. So as the ED, depending on the environment, you have a conversation with the chair and say, what do you, if you can, it depends. It's not always a healthy or safe conversation to have. But sometimes EDs can have a conversation with the chair and say, can we talk about this? Have you thought about this? Have you explored these other ways of potentially thinking about effective board practices? But that really relies on a strong board chair-ED relationship. So it depends. There's no answer, right? It depends. It depends who the board is as a whole, who the ED is, and what kind of resources you can take advantage of in the environment. And it's probably long-term change. Okay. Last question. I know you're filling out an evaluation. For me, this is my personal interest, right? In hearing from you around what worked, what didn't work, what could be better, because I do want to make sure it's better the next time, right? Always better. So share as much as you can from that perspective.
And if you'd like to receive a copy of the slide deck, please make sure that your email address is correct on this list. I'll hand it around one more time.
And I'll forward resources to Emily and she'll send them out as well. There are a lot, Bill, you must know as well too. Like I'm sure there's resources that are out there that are just online searches, but also other resources that are affordable for people.
Oh yeah. And United Way of Canada has got stuff about boards. Board Source is a paid site, but there's also a free community site you can download stuff from. You can subscribe to not-for-profit quarterly in the States, and they'll send you so many things. You'll say, oh, I know some stuff. But some of it is very good and up-to-date trends and stuff.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And MAS, itself is, some of you know Management Advisory Services, and we have a whole crew of about 50 volunteer consultants that will work with you and do some of this stuff for free. And we'll be looking after the next 4 workshops. So the questions you had on legal responsibilities, we'll dive deeper into that, and financial management, risk management, and then board evaluation too. How do you evaluate your board?
So those 4 will be coming up through Mass. We'll talk about strategic planning for sure in some of the upcoming sessions. So there's lots more detail that we're going to be going into, and hopefully this was the beginning, right, of touching upon some of the topics to come.
And for those of you participating by webinar, you can email me, mooney@ocasi.org. That's MOONEY. And I'll
What's your
forward
name?
you anything that
Before she
says
goes,
to me. Thank you very much for
ask
joining
the lady.
us.
What is your name?
Oh,
Harmony.
Harmony.
Okay.
Okay, so Sonia, thank you very much.
Thank
And we're
you.
going to end the webinar.
Thank you, Sonia.